Welcome to another edition of No Labels Talks. I'm Holly Page, co-founder of No Labels, here with my friend and colleague, Ryan Clancy. Ryan, how are you doing this week?
Good. How are you, Holly?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm a little conventioned out, having spent several nights trying to keep track of what was happening in Chicago.
I'm not, because I watched none of the convention live. My daughter's really into this book series called Dragon Masters. So I've been spending my evening reading Dragon Masters. And then in the morning, I get the summaries and the clips, which is fine, because let's be honest, anybody who can watch like 4 consecutive hours of a convention has got more stamina than I do.
It's true, and probably some sort of screw loose in the old brain. But some interesting things, though, that I zeroed in on, given our politics and the position of No Labels. After the first night, I was listening to some commentary, and the common kind of thread seemed to be the Democrats should just double down on getting out their vote, which implicitly basically means instead of trying to persuade swing voters to come their way. That is, of course, why the DLC was founded. So I'm particularly sensitive to that conversation. Makes no sense to me to, obviously we want to get out every vote we can, but why not focus on people who actually do vote, who are gettable, and instead of spending all your time and energy and money trying to get non-voters to vote.
You know what, though? You and I have talked about this before. I think that is so stupid and self-defeating for 2 reasons. So one is this idea that either party needs to placate their base and tell them the things they want to hear, to me is nonsense, because their base hates the other candidate so much, they will vote no matter what. So that, the left, when Biden was still in, the left would constantly be making these threats. If Biden doesn't do this, we're staying home. And I'd hear that and I'd say, no, you're not. Trump is on the ballot. You will walk over glass to go vote against them. So I always thought Biden could take them for granted. But the other thing I don't get is both parties are just totally content winning 51-49 and just squeezing out this victory. Where are the people with imagination saying, why don't we try to win an election 55-45? Because then not only could we win a bigger victory, we would actually have a mandate to get more change. But to do that, you might actually have to piss off some of the activists. And there's just not enough people that want to do that.
I totally agree. And also, and I'll be interested to ask Chris McNulty, our numbers guru, this, but we're not living in 1992 anymore. It's sad as that is for me to accept. And, the people who are self-identified independents or who are registered that way are the majority of voters. They have grown. And in fact, I was thinking, while we may not have had a presidential representation of this politics, we have a queen and her name is Oprah. And she told the Democratic Convention she is and has been for a long time a registered independent. So I think the political establishment needs to update who it envisions when we talk about these independent voters who are not committed to party over country. They really want to know the values and character of the candidate.
Well, Oprah's got a lot of company, because I don't know if we mentioned this on a previous podcast, but when you look at Gallup does this polling where they just ask people, to self-identify as an independent, a D or an R. And what's fascinating is every single generation is less attached to the parties than the previous one. So you look at the silent generation, the greatest generation, they still have this vestigial affinity because they remember Ronald Reagan and JFK. And so they still, place themselves in one of the parties. Gen Z, millennial voters, I'm right on the borderline of millennial, Gen X. They want nothing to do with the parties. The younger they are, the more they want to just be out on their own.
Exactly. And that is an interesting segue to our guest today, and something that I want to talk with you about that he said. Bob Cusack, and it's a great conversation that you moderated with him. But he said the thing that really, many things stuck out for me in your interview with him, but one in particular was he believes that no one who basically is anti-Trump could win the Republican nomination for probably the next 2 cycles after this. Yeah. And I think that's fascinating to think about for the, reorganization of politics, the folks who have been essentially chased out of the Republican Party and have come to where we are, or we've found them, or however that worked. What happens to them, and where do they put their political energy and activism?
Yeah, I mean, that is going to be, and we get into this with Bob, such a fascinating question, because that's what's so different. In 2016, Donald Trump was the insurgent, and when you think about all the organs of power within the Republican Party, the county chairs, the state party chairs, they were like Bush-Romney Republicans. Now, those are all Trump people running those institutions, and so even if he loses this time around, those people are still there. They're now the gatekeepers for whatever comes next. So it's gonna be really fascinating on the other side of this.
I'll just say the kind of core reason why no labels exist is because we need to unbelievably incentivize, reward, and encourage elected officials at the federal level to actually solve problems. And Bob, and you also discuss one of the biggest challenges that the nation faces going forward are debt and the deficit. And I think it's believe it or not, to our audience, we didn't prompt him or ask him to bring it up. He did on his own. And I think it's really the conversation that needs to be had that sadly isn't happening in this presidential contest so far.
Yes, all of a sudden, these very extravagant promises both Trump and Harris are making, we might wake up and realize we can't keep any of them if we don't get a handle on this. So, well, look, Bob Cusack's going to get into this and many other things. So, Holly, good to talk to you as always, and enjoy our interview with Bob.
Thanks, Ryan.
Hey there, this is Ryan Clancy here with another edition of No Labels Talks. And of course, last night we had the last night of the Democratic National Convention. So the pageantry and pomp season is over, and now we're onto the real campaign. And to talk to us about that, we are here with Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. Bob has been with them for 20 years, editor-in-chief for the last 10. One of the most thoughtful watchers of American politics out there. Bob, we're really thankful for you joining us today.
Oh, thanks for asking me. I've been looking forward to this.
So, Bob, you had a team, we were talking before the call of 8 people out on the ground on the convention from The Hill. Give us a sense of what they reported back. I mean, watching the news, I was told there was a lot of joy there, but right. What else was out there?
Well, we had an experienced team out there, and basically it's just remarkable. And this is what they said too, of how the mood changed in the Democratic Party over the last month, where people were just despondent, and the Democratic Party was in disarray. And I think for both conventions, you saw some joy. Obviously, the Republican convention was right after the assassination attempt. And I think Republicans had a good convention by and large, and I think Democrats did too. We're not really talking about the protesters. This is a race again. She's moving up, and that's what they got a sense, is that the energy was real. Now, a lot of this obviously is orchestrated, but at the same time, they had to organize a convention, as you know, Ryan. People are planning this a year out, and they had to kind of flip the switch. And yeah, there were some stumbles. They mentioned President Biden's second term and the platform, but by and large, they did a pretty good job. And the party is very much energized. And Republicans are getting a little frustrated right now, and that's remarkable to see, because honestly, after the assassination attempt and after the Republican convention, it looked like Biden was not going to step aside. I thought Trump was not only going to win, but he could also win the popular vote. So now the race is totally different.
we're going to spend most of our time today talking about Harris-Trump race, because that's, of course, what most people are interested in. But I do want to ask you, these conventions have often been the launching pads for future stars in the parties. A lot of people think about former President Obama's speech at the 2004 convention. Do you think there was anybody at either convention that was so impressive that it raised the attention of people in the party that said, hey, maybe we got a future leader here?
I don't think anyone got to that Obama level speech in 2004. That said, there are some rising stars. I thought Nikki Haley's speech was fairly strong. I think Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, is someone to watch. I think he's a really good speaker. As we reported, two other rising stars, Gretchen Whitmer and Newsom, were not interested in joining the ticket, and that proved to be true. But they're also two rising stars to watch. It's going to be interesting to see who emerges. I do think that I'm not sure if Nikki Haley has a completely bright future in the Republican Party, but as you know, Ryan, things change over 4 years.
Yeah. You wrote, Bob, recently, notwithstanding all of this momentum that is behind Vice President Harris, and certainly the latest polls we've seen are starting to show her, up in the national popular vote, tied or up in a lot of swing states. The betting markets, if you like to follow those things, show her now with a slightly favored to win in the Electoral College, whereas a month ago it was Trump 70% to win. But you said that you think Trump still has an advantage over her on most policy topics.
Yes.
Could you talk about what that's rooted in? Are you looking at polling or what's?
Yeah, polling. We partner with Mark Penn and Harvard Harris Polling, and other than abortion, Republicans win on almost every issue right now. And that's why a lot of Republicans are telling Trump again and again and again, stick to policy. Don't talk about crowd size. Don't talk about her race or making fun of her name. That's not going to win you independent voters. But whether it's the economy, inflation, immigration, certainly, those are big top issues in the country right now. And those go to Republicans. Now, it's interesting that even though Harris is the vice president and, of course, is tied to the Biden administration, pretty important player, some voters are not blaming her for what maybe they think Biden did and giving her another chance. At the same time, we're expecting her to do a major interview. We don't really know where she stands on a lot of issues. So, and why did she change her position on Medicare for all and fracking from 2019? When she ran for president, didn't even make it to 2020 because she didn't make it to Iowa, did not have a successful presidential campaign. But why did she change her positions on that? And was it for political expediency? She's not going to say that. She's going to have an answer to that. But it does seem like on those policy issues, at least right now, she's getting a bit of a pass on it, where they blame Biden, but they're not blaming Harris. Or maybe it's just because she's the new face. And as you know, Ryan, a lot of people didn't want to see this rematch. Yeah. And now you got some new blood, whether it's the Walz or her. It's a totally different feel.
Have you heard or seen any reporting, Bob, about when we could expect a less scripted set of appearances for either Tim Walz or Kamala Harris? Because, of course, for most of the past month, there's been no town halls, one-on-one interviews, and
it's gonna. Well, she said she's gonna do one major one, and one idea that they've done before, that they could do a joint appearance on something like 60 Minutes. We don't know what outlet they're going to choose, but you can't be afraid of the press. I think Hillary Clinton, we asked her, The Hill asked her for multiple interviews in 2016, never sat down with us. Trump sat down with us 4 times. The first time we asked him for an interview with Trump Tower, the staff says, you got 15 minutes. He gave us 80 minutes. And the reason I'm raising that is you can't be safe and become president. You've got to go for it. You can't be afraid of the media. And Trump is not afraid of the media. So even though she may be, she's starting to pull ahead of him, ahead of Trump in some areas, that doesn't mean you're going to be ahead of him down the road. So I think she's got to have an aggressive media strategy and answer some of these questions because honestly, in prior interviews like the one she did with Lester Holt when she was vice president was a complete disaster when she was asked about the border. So I think she's a better politician now, but she's going to be tested in the weeks ahead.
World events and October surprises and everything else might in the end have a lot more to say about where this is going to go and what this election is going to turn on. But if you were to predict today, as you look out over the next 2.5 months, the defining issues that we're going to be talking about over the course of the next 2.5 months, what do you think those are going to be?
Well, I definitely think it's the economy because that affects everybody and inflation. Inflation has been going down. The headlines have been actually fairly good for Democrats on that recently. However, it's not like you get a rebate for all that inflation that you paid for. So people are still bitter over that. And one thing that I think Joe Biden really lacked that I'm interested to see how Harris deals with it. Harris is running a different type of campaign because Biden really didn't have the Bill Clinton empathy thing. He was very defensive on inflation, on Afghanistan. He's defensive on a lot of things, and that's why his poll numbers were not very good. But I think what hits people the most is how are you going to make the economy better, and how are you going to keep inflation going down low and moving forward? Biden kind of looked backward. Harris is looking forward. Elections are about the future. And she started to outline some of her economic proposals. The other big issue that I think both candidates have to answer is number one, how they're going to deal with the expiring Trump tax cuts. Now, of course, Trump wants to not only extend them but enlarge them. Which ones will Harris go for? Which ones will she not? But the big issue is that you have, okay, Republicans want to boost defense spending. Democrats want to have a child care tax credit, and Republicans, by and large, and a lot of Democrats want to at least extend a good amount of the Trump tax cuts, maybe not all of them. But what are you going to do on the debt? That's going to add $5 to $6 trillion right off the bat, and then we're in territory of 40 trillion plus. No one's talking about dealing with the debt, and that's one where honestly our politicians are going to have to deal with because the future of Medicare and Social Security depends on it.
Bob, why is that? Because, one of the things we actually have our research team doing right now, they're starting to catalog, they're laying out 2 columns. In one column is all the things Trump or Harris have promised they're going to give people, or in the form of tax cuts, spending programs, everything else. And the other column is things they're going to do about the debt. And the best you can say is there's some kind of pablum about we're going to deal with wasteful government spending.
Yeah.
We are in this situation right now where this year we are going to spend more on interest payments than we are on the Pentagon. And this is at a moment when, and this is the other thing our team is looking at, it is so unusual historically for us to have a debt this big at a moment when the economy is pretty good. Typically you have a recession, deficit grows, things start getting better, deficit closes. We're talking about a $2 trillion deficit this year with the stock market rising, unemployment under 5%. I mean, whose fault is it that we're not talking about this? Is it the media? Is it the politicians? Is it both?
I think it's all the above. I definitely think it's the politicians have to deal with it. They're the ones who have to pass it. The media definitely can put pressure on politicians. But it's amazing that, we had a surplus 25 years ago and now we're talking about, record debt levels and, this idea, well, debt doesn't matter. I just think that is such a bad concept. Debt does matter. You can look at Greece and what they had to experience. And I do think that at some point they're going to have to get serious about it. But you're right. I mean, you look at, the Wall Street Journal editorial page just was killing on Trump's effort to stop taxes on Social Security because that's going to put another huge hole in the budget. And I do think it's one of those things where how are you going to pay for that? It used to be, and you can't, Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump don't agree on much, but one of the things they do agree on, and I think they're wrong on, is is how do you get out of the debt? You grow the economy. You're not gonna get out of $35 trillion of debt by just growing the economy. You're gonna have to tackle Medicare and Social Security at some point. You have to tackle defense spending at some point. And of course, Democrats are saying you're gonna have to raise taxes. Okay, but there's gonna have to be some grand compromise. But as you know, Ryan, it used to be even when Clinton and Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich were at each other's throats during impeachment, they passed the Balanced Budget Act in 1997, which was really tightened the belt and had some Medicare reforms. That was a bipartisan bill. Now, big bills, sweeping bills are done with one-party rule, like Obamacare, which got no Republican votes, or the Trump tax cuts, which were rammed home, just like Obamacare, got no Democratic votes. So it's something that's going to have to be fixed. But I'm befuddled by it as well, as more people don't talk about it.
One of the things you just mentioned, and we're going to be talking about this a lot more with our community in the next couple of months, is under the radar at the convention, Chuck Schumer, who is of course the majority leader, said, if the Democrats run the table, he's going to get rid of the filibuster for at least legislation to pass abortion legislation and voting legislation. And of course, this would continue this trend where we've already gotten rid of the filibuster for judicial nominations, the Supreme Court, federal courts. Trump, of course, tried to lean on Mitch McConnell to get rid of the filibuster.
Yes.
We think that's just about the worst idea you could have to get rid of this, because if you want to make everything in Washington worse, why don't you just make the Senate more like the House? So every 2 or 4 years, we'll rewrite our entire tax code, healthcare system on 50 votes.
Right.
But that is such a huge problem. There doesn't seem to be anybody that has a sense of restraint on either side.
Yeah, no, listen, and Chuck Schumer's doing a little spinning because the map is not very good for Democrats. There's so many more Democrats defending seats. So in order for Democrats to keep the Senate, they're going to have to basically win every close race. And I mean every race in Montana and Ohio and New Mexico and Pennsylvania, Michigan, and the list goes on and on. They're probably not going to pick up any seats. They think they can possibly knock off Ted Cruz or Rick Scott. I don't think either one is going to happen. So I think the best case scenario for Democrats is they stay at basically 50-50 and Harris wins. But you're right. Mitch McConnell resisted those efforts from Trump to change the filibuster rules. And honestly, I'm not even sure if Schumer gets his way and defies the odds and is the majority leader in the next Congress. I'm not sure he's going to get all 50 Democrats to go along with that anyway. But listen, the pressure is there because, divided government and getting things done like, Trent Lott and Tom Daschle did. They didn't agree on a lot, but they got some stuff done. Those days of kind of bipartisan cooperation, I hope they're not over, but they've been snuffed out recently.
I want to talk about that Senate map that you mentioned, and just to ground everybody in the current math. Democrats have 51 seats in the Senate. They're almost certainly going to lose Joe Manchin's seat, so that would get it to 50-50. So you identified Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan as states where the Republicans have a shot at a pickup. What are the state of those races right now? Like, I had read a poll recently that Tester in Montana is down by a little bit, though he's a bit of a Manchin-like figure in the sense that he's probably the only Democrat that can win statewide office in Montana. Do you think the Democrats can hold 4 of those?
I don't. I think because it's a presidential election year, and that's part of the reason you mentioned West Virginia, which, as is definitely a state that has really gone red recently. I interviewed Manchin after his last victory against Patrick Morrisey, former Capitol Hill aide who's running for governor now. That race took a lot out of him. That was not in a presidential election year. It's just when you're in a red state like West Virginia, it's tough to win, and that's especially if you're a Democrat. And same thing for John Tester, very good candidate. That race is very close. I think there was a poll showing him down, as you mentioned, but incumbents, generally speaking, do well in the polls until Labor Day. But watch the polls post Labor Day. That's when they can really change, and that's that's where I think that, yes, Democrats are going to win some of these Senate races in Pennsylvania, maybe Wisconsin, Michigan. But in those red states like Ohio and Montana, I think if you put some truth serum to them and said, okay, Democrats, okay, Chuck Schumer, you're going to win one of those races, they would take that right now. I just can't see them winning both those races, even though Tester and Brown are fantastic candidates, and they've got a lot of money. But I just think the politics of the presidential election year and people showing up voting for Trump, that's going to really hurt him. And to your point, Tester is an independent guy. He has not endorsed Harris yet, so that's interesting.
Oh, that. Yeah, that was very interesting. An hour before we got on the call here today, this is Friday afternoon, Robert F. Kennedy dropped out of the race, and he did endorse Trump on the way out. Now, what do you think that's going to mean? Now, just so everybody's aware, towards the end of Kennedy's campaign, a lot of his ballot access efforts petered out, and he clearly just wasn't able to get on as many states as he thought. But the fact that he is endorsing Trump on the way out, do you think that's going to matter? I know there's been a lot of debate among pollsters as to how it's going to matter, or if.
Yeah, I saw Karl Rove mention it could make a difference in a couple states, I believe Arizona and Georgia. He said, on one hand, I think no, because RFK's numbers have gone down. He's a unique character, and he was doing well. I think his whole strategy this year was based upon factors that now have changed, that most people did not, up to 70% did not want a rematch of Trump or Biden. And I think RFK Jr., who was around 15%, and the presidential commission lets you into the debates if you're 15% and on enough ballots. And I think he was banking that he was going to get on the debates. And then, of course, the commission was pushed aside. And honestly, Biden and Trump had they did their own side thing, partially because they didn't want RFK in the debate. So on one hand, I think, yes, it could make a difference, but then again, his numbers have been plummeting. On the other side, though, look at 2016 and 2020. The difference in some of these states was 10,000 votes, in that range. And I thought Biden was going to win in 2020. I actually thought he would win more comfortably than he did. He won very narrowly, just like Trump narrowly won. So when you're talking about 10,000 votes and RFK's going around with Trump, Trump needs something. This helps him after the honeymoon continues unbelievably for Harris. Maybe this is but politics, as you know, changes so quickly, and maybe she has a bad interview, or maybe she has a bad debate. This thing is going to be a roller coaster the whole time. But yes, I think when you're talking about the margins in some of these battlegrounds, it could make the difference.
Yeah. I have one more question for you, Bob, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Everybody can just raise their hand. And it's this. We have gotten very used to, going back to 92, every election except for one, we've had at least 3 scheduled presidential debates, 1 vice presidential debate. We, of course, had the Biden-Trump debate. I don't know if that counts. Right.
Right.
But we've currently got at least 1 scheduled between Walz and Vance, and 1 at least for Trump and Harris. Do you think there's going to be others beyond those 2? Will there be other presidential debates?
I think there will be. I think, as you say, it's typical to have 3 in 1. So the VP, they have the 1, and I think that'll be it. I do think there'll be another presidential debate because, I know networks, they all want another debate. I know Fox is pushing for it. I really don't think Harris is going to agree to a Fox News debate, but maybe not. We shall see. It also depends on where the race goes. I mean, part of the reason that Biden agreed to debate Trump before the convention, and that changed history, was because he was losing. So, if you're losing, you want to have a lot of debates. So I do think I don't know if they're going to have 3, but I think that the chances of at least getting 1 more, I hope there are 4 or 5. I mean, I think that's what people need, they want. But I think we're going to get 2, if not 3 presidential debates. And as you say, 3 would be normal. But the chances beyond 3, probably not so much.
Well, and typically, or at least in recent years, they've mixed up the format too. We had a town
Yes.
hall, so hopefully we can get that. All right, well, let's get to some questions. And if you could just say your name and where you're from, and let's start with Ian. Ian, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ian. I'm from Blacksburg, Virginia. And my question is specifically about Kamala Harris and her foreign policy strategy. We haven't really heard much about that from her or her campaign, and specifically on Israel. And I think a large reason for that is because she's trying to draw in a voter base that has a lot of animosity towards Israel, but also a lot of classic Democrats who are more supportive. So I'm curious if you think she'll ever have a more defined foreign policy positions on Israel and also Ukraine and Taiwan, and what that might look like if she develops that those policies.
Very good question. I'm also a big fan of Blacksburg. One of our daughters goes to Virginia Tech and actually was dropped off this week. So we don't know a lot about her foreign policy because she didn't talk a lot about it in 2019 when she ran, had a rough presidential bid. But I do think those are valid questions, because the question on Ukraine, let's start with Ukraine. The motto of the Biden administration is, well, how long are we going to keep doing this? How long are we going to keep giving them money? And the answer has been, whether it's Joe Biden himself or the Treasury Secretary Yellen has said, as long as it takes. Is that her position? We don't know. What would happen if China invades Taiwan? What would she do? We don't know. And on Israel, it seems like her rhetoric has been a little bit left of Biden, while supporting Israel, but also saying things that I think that the pro-Palestinian activists do like. And I think that's part of the reason why the protesters weren't a huge storyline this week. But honestly, we don't know where she would be on a lot of these foreign policy questions. And I think that's why we need to have the debates, because she needs to be challenged on them, not just give a speech on it where she can say however she wants. But I think that's one of the biggest questions. And whoever gets the media interview, which has to happen if she abides by her word, but sometime next week, should really focus on foreign policy.
Thanks, Ian. Al, you have a question.
Yeah, Bob, my name's Al Bartell. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia. My question goes to the rise of the southern part of America being so dominant now. I grew up over in South Carolina, and as an Air Force veteran, I spent time in Mississippi and Florida and the Carolinas. And we have the former governor of South Carolina and Florida were presidential candidates, and the governors of North Carolina and Tennessee and Kentucky are all considered as shortlists for vice president. So my question goes to this emergence of the Deep South being battleground language instead of what we know like Ohio and the giant metropolis of New York and Chicago and LA. None of that is in play now, but the southern region is leading the charge in terms of dominance, impact, and battleground. Could you say a little bit about what you think is causing that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The South is, as you know, Alice, the politics of the South has changed over the many decades as far as party dominance and that kind of thing. But you're right, as far as like Georgia, Georgia was not viewed as certainly a battleground, and now it's a huge battleground. It's another battleground this year, whether it's Senate races or presidential. And it's interesting that Harris ended up picking a governor, because Washington's so dysfunctional. I'm not surprised that she had, you mentioned DeSantis and Nikki Haley, and obviously Walz was picked. Walz was in the House, but then ran statewide, and look at him now. So I do think that, and Bashir too was considered to be a VP candidate, and he keeps winning in a red state. So that's impressive. I do think that's where you're looking for 2028 and beyond, that's where you're looking for potential people. You know, I don't think DeSantis is certainly done, did not have a successful run. I'm not sure if Haley can make up with the Trump wing again, but at the same time, 4 years is a long time, as I said. So, but it is interesting that there are some major power brokers in the South now. Still have that, you know, Michigan, Pennsylvania, you know, those are very important, but you've got to look at them and the South. And it's, but when you think about it too, it's, I know there have been initiatives, but, you know, you talk about 7 to 10 states, that's all that matters. The rest of the states don't matter. You know, you know what the outcome is going to be right now.
Fred, over to you.
Hi, Bob, thanks for being here. Fred Amos, Omaha, Nebraska. If Donald Trump loses the election, what's the future hold for the Republican Party?
He could run again. I mean, I think the Trump effect, and it's very interesting to see, you know, the Democrats had a lot of former presidents and star power, where Trump's convention didn't have former presidents, obviously no Bushes there, and no tributes to John McCain or Romney, past nominees where the Democrats did it. You know, I do think that the effect of Trump will live on beyond how long Trump lives. And I do think that, I mean, it's remarkable that he's the nominee again, and everyone has counted him out again and again and again. Obviously, he has some legal fights he's going to have to fend off, and it's going to be harder if he doesn't win to fend those off if he loses. But I think the Trump effect is going to be there for a long time. He has changed the party in many ways, and I think that when people were thinking about challenging Trump for the nomination, like Nikki Haley did, I just thought, well, if Trump runs, he's probably gonna, you know, he's gonna be at least one of the favorites to win, and he ended up winning big. But I do think that going forward, you're gonna have to be, you can't be anti-Trump and get the nomination. I just don't think you can in 2028 and maybe even 2032. I think you're gonna have to at least appeal to that MAGA base.
And Bob, of course, part of that, in a way that wasn't the case in 2016, is really the institutionalization of, you know, Trump allies in the state parties and county, you know, county party chairs and everything else. Those are really the gatekeepers for a lot of local politicians. You got to get past them. Yeah. Stephen.
Thank you. And Bob, pleasure to have you here. Steve Schleicher from Florida. Recently, the economic forecasts of employment have been revised downwards quite sharply and consistently have been revised downwards. One of the things that we heard in the convention was the feeling that there's been a tremendous improvement in terms of employment, although some of that has been the rebound post-COVID under the Biden administration. Do you think if we continue to have downward revisions in terms of the employment stats, that becomes an actual issue in the election coming forward, or is it a bit of a red herring?
You know, I think some of what, you know, because you can point to some, as you know, economic factors and say, hey, the economy is doing pretty well. And then, but if you look at inflation and you're trying to buy a home now, as some of our young reporters in our newsroom are, you know, it's hard to because of interest rates. So I think most of the economy is baked in to some degree. I do think the candidates have to address it of what their plan is because no matter how good the economy is, you want it to be stronger. But it does seem like, you know, Wall Street has, especially with now with a rate expected to be cut from the Fed, I think the news is getting better for Democrats on the economy, but I also think there's a lot of post-COVID anger and inflation. I mean, listen, you know, trillions of dollars were spent, and you can argue that we needed to spend it during the pandemic, but you can also argue a lot went to fraud and a lot, and what happened afterward was expected and inflation happened. But I do think the economy is slowly starting to pick up. But if you look at the polls over the last year, most people including Democrats, are not happy with it. So in some ways, the perception is more important than the reality. And honestly, I don't think Democrats do a very good job of talking up the economy. Trump is very good at talking up the economy. And I haven't seen a Democratic president do that really well since maybe Bill Clinton.
I may have misstated how I was intending to refer to my question. Will the Republicans, who typically are very focused on conspiracy theories, use the downward revisions that have been happening as one more conspiracy that they will try to hang as an election point?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like when in the moments after I learned that of the assassination attempt on Trump, I was telling our colleagues, can you imagine the conspiracy theories are going to come out of this one? And partially that was the government's fault that so many were born because the Secret Service unbelievably did not have press conferences on a daily basis to explain what happened. But yes, no, I think when you get into this silly season, and we're definitely in the silly season post Labor Day, you're going to see a lot of conspiracy theories of them trying to cook the numbers and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Wayne, you have a question.
Hi, from Salt Lake City. Talk about Governor Hogan's viability in the Senate, and is that an aberration or is that a roadmap for people who may want to win in purple states or blue states?
Hogan's he's a great candidate. There's no doubt about it. And he's had a pleasure to meet with him, and he's a very down-to-earth guy. He's got a shot to win in Maryland. He's the underdog though, because it's a blue state and it's a presidential election year. And I'm forgetting exactly the stat, but roughly over the last 60 some odd Senate races, only one candidate won her race, even though her party did not win the presidential race, and that was Susan Collins. So basically the stat shows you the way your state goes, that's the way the Senate race is going to go as well. So that's what Hogan's going up against, a lot of daunting stats. And I think he's run a good campaign where he's distanced himself from Trump because he has to. But now, on the other hand, if Democrats are spending money in a state like Maryland, that's kind of a win for Republicans. But because Maryland is so blue, I would be not shocked, but I'd be surprised if Hogan can pull that one out.
Yeah. Rhonda.
Hi, Rhonda from the Knoxville, Tennessee area. I am just scratching my head at Kamala's popularity, where she is right now, given her failed run in 2020 and the fact that she is so unclear on her policies. Is this just, is much of this attributed to fear and hatred of Trump? And I'm very hopeful that we'll actually get to hear her policies. What are the chances that she's going to accept an interview with a media outlet that will actually push her on issues and not throw her softball questions? And who would that be? Who would the best people be to do that?
We'd love to be that. That's the thing, like, honestly, and this is, the Hill has consistently, and studies do back this up. We don't care. I don't even vote. I mean, we are constantly in the middle. We don't care who's up or who's down. But honestly, over the last several years, it's been harder for us to get interviews because a lot of politicians don't want tough but fair interviews. And that's the best compliment I've gotten from both sides of the aisle. It's like, you guys are tough but fair. They're not going to pick, I think, someone who's tough but fair for that first interview. I think it's going to, whether it's CNN or MSNBC or 60 Minutes, it could be difficult. That could be too tough on them, maybe. I do think that she can't run and hide. I mean, that's why Biden. I thought it was stunning that so many Democrats wanted to keep Biden in amid his, lacking the mental acuity after that debate. But even before the debate, it was clear he was not the same Biden of 2020. Go back and look at the 2020 debates. Totally different. I think you're right. Listen, I think that America deserves to know where she stands on a lot of these issues and why she's flip-flopped. Now, you can flip-flop, and that's fine. I think it's fine for people to change their positions based upon events or based upon things that change, or as a politician matures and gets more information, that's fine. But you got to explain it. And that's where I think if she tries to run a campaign that's just hiding from the media. That's good. I know we're not far from November 5th, but people can turn on her for that. I'm biased because I'm part of the media, but I think they're going to pick a friendly interview to start with. But even that friendly interview, whoever it is, that person is going to have to ask some tough questions or their reputation is going to get damaged. So I agree. I think that she's on a honeymoon. It's lasted a long time, but now she needs to tell the American people where she stands and why she stands for those positions.
And Molly, over to you.
Thank you. McLean, Virginia. Could you please comment on the theme of patriotism that flowed through the Democratic convention? Was it to steal the Republicans' thunder? Was it directed at the independent vote? Or is there some new, I don't know, incorporation of patriotism into the Democratic Party?
That's a question. I think well, both parties have to win the independents. I mean, Biden won in 2020 because he won independents. And I know it's amazing to think, but there actually are still people out there who haven't made up their mind, and they have to win them over. And Biden had lost independents since he won in 2020. Harris's early numbers are pretty good among independents. And I think patriotism is a good thing. And I think they should. I think both parties should embrace that. And I do think there is this, I think you want to have a feeling of, when you're running for president, if you win, you're going to be in the living rooms of America for 4 years. I do think people vote more for personality than policy. They want to know policy, but they want to be comfortable with the person that's coming into their living room every day. And I think that was, we really haven't seen Harris a lot as VP. And that was what this week was about, was trying to define her on their terms and obviously give a very flattering view of her. And so far, it's working, but she got a long way to go.
Bob, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes with us this afternoon. But before we go, anything else that you think our community should be looking out for? Is there a hidden story hiding in plain sight that the media should be talking about that they're not about this campaign?
I'm going to go back to the debt. I know we talked about it already, but I think that's the most important issue that I think that both the media, as we talked about, and people should be asking about. And it's one of those things where you've got to talk about the tough issues. You've got to talk about, Congressman Arrington is the Budget Committee chairman. He wants to pass a bill that would set up a fiscal commission. It's gotten some bipartisan support. I think that's a good idea. Now, it's of course attracted a lot of critics, but I think that the debt is something that national security experts have testified on Capitol Hill as saying this is a real big problem for our world when we have this much debt. So I think that America has to wake up to this, and because usually Congress, and this is what they did in the 1990s, they waited till the last second before Medicare was about to go bankrupt, then they had to do something. I think that's the big sleeper issue. And honestly, if you're upfront with people and normal and say, hey, we got a problem, we got to have to deal with this, we're going to have to compromise, people get that. But so many politicians now are just so afraid to talk about the problems that they were elected to solve.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, the voters are a lot smarter than politicians give them credit for if you're just honest with them about what they're dealing with. Well, Bob, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the conversation, and the questions are great.
Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for joining us here on No Labels Talks. Until the next time, we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.